a senior Malaysian leader once said to the US, just because you have an enemy doesn't mean they have to be our enemies.
We need to make a wise decision not to play to the hands of now such a what I call economic bully. Countries in ASEAN, for instance, we need to have a collective stance, collective position.
So this idea of the US trying to contain China, whether Malaysia is on board with that strategy, Malaysia is quite clear about it. Our ASEAN neutrality, Malaysian neutrality is that we are not taking sides, we are not going to gang up with anyone against anyone.
Not only countries in Asia coming together, but countries of the rest of the world other than the US are coming together. Because the US this time is not just targeting one or two countries, but the whole world.
The communication between China and Malaysia could be traced back to thousands of years ago, back to Han Dynasty. And nowadays, China and Malaysia is strengthening their ties, trying to build a China-Malaysia community with a shared future. To understand the importance of this relationship and its impact not only on this region, but on the whole world, we are bringing you this panel discussion right in Kuala Lumpur. So without further ado, let's meet all the guests joining the panel discussion today. So I'll start introducing each of the gentlemen here. The first gentleman, Mr. Ong Tiket, President of the Belt and Road Initiative Caucus for Asia Pacific. Welcome.
Thank you.
Professor Peter T. Chang from Malaysia-China Friendship Association in Kuala Lumpur, and also the former Deputy Director of the Institute of China Studies at the University of Malaya. Welcome.
Thank you.
Also joining us are Mr. Boon Nagara, Director and Senior Fellow of the Renaissance Strategic Research Institute. Welcome.
Thank you, Jinping.
Welcome, gentlemen. So, as we all know, Chinese President Xi Jinping is paying a state visit to Malaysia, and the relationship between China and Malaysia has, as I mentioned in the intro, could be date back to hundreds of years, and we have such a long, deep, friendly connections. So, can you share your perspective on the impact of this state visit? How will this change the relationship between China and Malaysia? Maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. At this juncture, I presume we are all getting very excited to welcome the arrival of the Chinese President Xi Jinping, to Malaysia. His visit, to my understanding, is a scaling of a new height of the political trust between China and Malaysia, more so after the coming into fruition of the China-Malaysia community with a shared future. In fact, the visit itself, is a manifestation of the success of China's neighborhood diplomacy. I presume on this premise, perhaps we can anticipate even more mutual visits between the two countries, particularly at the top echelon of leaders. And that will further bolster the bilateral ties between our two countries in the interest of the region, not just between China and Malaysia, but rather we can be the iconic model of neighborhood diplomacy in the region.
Thank you. Professor Chang?
Thank you, Jinping. I think President's visits comes at a very critical moment, not only for Malaysia, but also for Southeast Asia, ASEAN, and pretty much the rest of the world in the context of the ongoing trade war that we are seeing right now, the unleashing of tariffs across the globe. So I think President Xi's visit is critical in the sense that he would come to Malaysia and Southeast Asia more broadly to reaffirm China's commitment to our country and to our region. China has proven to be a very strong, reliable, dependable partner for us, for our country, and also for our region. And this visit is going to reinforce that. For that reason, I think President Xi's visit today is absolutely critical.
Mr. Nagara?
Today's visit by President Xi Jinping is both timely and very important. He was last year, 12 years ago in Malaysia. But this time it's even more important because, only last year Malaysia and China celebrated 50th anniversary of their diplomatic relations. And this year, Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN. And not only that, but the trade relationship is even more important than it was. And Malaya and the independent sovereign Malay states before, centuries ago, had very good relations with China, mainly through trade. And today, world trade is even more important given the uncertainties in the West. And now with Malaysia and ASEAN, together with China, there's so much more to be done on several levels, bilaterally between our two countries, as well as between ASEAN and China, through, for example, the China-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, and also through RCEP. And also, of course, as you will know, Malaysia has applied to be a full member of BRICS. And all these together are working at the same time, pulling in the same direction, so that we will have mutual benefits all around for our countries and our peoples.
I think all of you mentioned the importance at this time, particularly changing time, and you also mentioned the tariff war launched by the US president, targeting the rest of the world, but particularly targeting China. I want to hear your perspective on the impact of the US tariff war on China and on Asia, on the rest of the world. Do you think it will separate Asia or bring Asia closer together?
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, my immediate response is the word reciprocal tariff is very misleading. Yeah. It is absolutely unilateral, meaning Donald Trump chose to impose his own conditions, his own computations of tariff on others, friends and foes alike. But by so doing, actually, he set a very dangerous precedent that is bad enough to throw the entire global trading system into tatters, particularly when he chose to disdain the WTO regulations. That means to say the WTO regulatory role is totally ignored, if not abandoned. And what surprised me most is that he made a quick U-turn shortly after the announcement on the so-called Liberation Day. And now that all other countries except China are given a 90-day pause, a 90-day reprieve. And we don't know what is going to happen after 90 days. And that, in fact, would result in more uncertainties across the world. But on the other hand, of course, we can see very clearly by now, his real target, his main target is none other than China. Meaning to say, now, he wants to encircle China in a way, right? By isolating China, perhaps he thought that he could get what he wants. But personally, I think otherwise. Now, this is going to be something unprecedented, but one thing for sure, now, that kind of uncertainties or even the repercussions that is going to be brought about by his decision, now, would be as bad as the Great Depression in 1930s. It is quite reminiscent of the Great Depression those days. And I hope countries like ours, countries across Global South, perhaps we need to make a wise decision not to play to the hands of now such a what I call economic bully. I call that economic bullying, and that shouldn't be allowed. And of course, people can argue that small countries, they simply don't have the clout to fight back. What more you talk about retaliatory tariff? You don't have the kind of tools, the kind of clout. But having said that, I still believe that countries in ASEAN, for instance, we need to have a collective stance, collective position. But more importantly, now in the following negotiation with Washington, that shouldn't be merely bilateral. That means to say, if you were to go bilateral, that means to say you are foregoing now your collective strength. You don't have the bargaining chips. This is something that I'm worried most at this juncture. In the case of China, of course, I think China so far has been quite well prepared for any kind of so-called trade war or even conflict by leveraging new markets across the global south as well as Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, of course, is a ready market. It's a ready market. And I could see so far the partnership between ASEAN, for instance, and China now has been strengthening from time to time. This is one of the ways to hedge against such risk. Now, when any leaders from the collective West were to go for so-called decoupling, this is what I call, a different form of decoupling.
Professor Chang, I want to ask you, because I remember a senior Malaysian leader once said to the US, just because you have an enemy doesn't mean they have to be our enemies. But as Mr. Ong just mentioned, this new tariff war is the US new strategy to encircle China. Do you think Malaysia is getting on board, or do you think other Asian countries are getting on board with this?
No. Malaysia has always maintained its very open free trade policy. We have the ASEAN centrality, ASEAN neutrality principles that is the foundation of our relationship with other countries. We will trade with anybody. So we are not going to gang up with anyone against anyone. So this idea of the US trying to contain China, whether Malaysia is on board with that strategy, Malaysia is quite clear about it. Our ASEAN neutrality, Malaysian neutrality is that we are not taking sides. We are not going to gang up with anyone against anyone. So that is our fundamental sort of foreign policy outlook. We will engage with everyone. So I just want to add that Malaysia and ASEAN as a whole in general, when we see the trade war erupting, immediate response is that we got to stand back and be united, to work together as an entity, as a regional bloc, as ASEAN as a whole. But we extend it bigger, broader as well, not just ASEAN, but perhaps, as Boon has said, BRICS and the Global South and RCEP and others. So China's President Xi Jinping's visit to the region right now is really also to reinforce that our collective position stand that we should really respond to these tariffs as a bloc. Last month, China, Japan, and Korea have decided to coordinate their response to the impending. They already saw that this tariff was coming. They agreed to work together. I think ASEAN and China should have a similar strategy. We should come together to work together to coordinate our response. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim already said that ASEAN should really respond to this terrorist war as a collective bloc. We do not have the details as right now. The things are so fluid. We just exactly don't know where the tariff is going to be falling on, where it's going to be paused and restarted again. But we just basically have to step back for a while. But the message is clear. We do want to respond as a collective entity.
Mr. Nagara, what's your thought on this US tariff war?
Well, not only are countries in Asia coming together, but countries of the rest of the world, other than the US, are coming together. Because the US this time is not just targeting one or two countries, but the whole world. Only the difference being only in the level of the tariffs, which are very unfair, unreasonable, and I would add unsustainable. So I would predict that later this year, latest next year, the tariffs will be no more. Because for the main reason being that they are very self-destructive to the US itself. it hits the US and its people enormously, worse than any other country. When you look at the figures, each household is expected to have to spend an additional 5,000 US dollars a year from now because of the tariffs. And corporate profits will be down because the tariffs are actually an import tax on American companies importing goods from overseas. And while Trump and his government says that they're collecting money, well, they're collecting money from their own people, from the left hand to the right hand, and actually the rest of the world coming together, becoming more integrated economically and trading more with each other, less with the US, and that is a way to reduce the pain. Unfortunately, there is pain all around, but I think the greatest pain will be to the US itself. It's very unsustainable, and we can expect it to go away very soon.
And I think all of you already mentioned the importance of ASEAN. And actually, I remember some of the people from the US actually mentioned if we can suffocate China, squeeze China by cutting the US market from China. But actually, the number one trading partner for China is ASEAN countries. And China has been Malaysia's largest trading partner for 16 consecutive years. And also, Malaysia is China's second largest partner in ASEAN and also the largest source of imports. So there's a lot of cooperation, a lot of trades going on between China and Malaysia, between China and the ASEAN countries. So can you share with us the importance of ASEAN in this changing world, and maybe how can ASEAN bring regional stability?
In the first place, in the present global dynamics, ASEAN remains a force to reckon with, not just because of its economic might, but more importantly, the centrality, the ASEAN centrality has always been the bedrock of ensuring a neutral and non-aligned zone in the region, non-aligned zone as well as a peaceful zone, right? And that has been the continuation of the Zopfan Declaration. Zopfan stands for Zone of Peace, Peace and Neutrality. And that has been in place since the year 1971. In other words, simply put, Southeast Asia has always been an area now where foreign interventions, of course, sometimes you couldn't avoid it, but more importantly, the countries in the region, we stay as a unit, we stay as one entity. And we are here to ensure that the regional security as well as the multilateral cooperation here are all in our hands, not to be dictated by any foreign powers. And on top of that, of course, ASEAN so far has proven to the world that we manage to foster a good partnership with China. And this is not just what we call marriage of convenience, but rather, now this has been something that stands the various acid tests over the years. It is an enduring partnership, not just confined within the bounds of economics, but more importantly, it is now evolving into a community of shared interests, meaning this is going to be a multi-dimensional partnership, right, in the region. And so far, I do observe that great powers from the region as well as outside the region, actually, they have given their words to support, to endorse now our ASEAN centrality. And in a way, that gives us the assurance that at least at the moment, now ASEAN would remain, ASEAN would be given the liberty, right, to do things in their own ways, right, in the name of ASEAN centrality.
Yeah. Well, Jinping, you rightly mentioned that trade between Malaysia and China, as well as between ASEAN and China have been growing steadily and progressively. But that's only the quantitative side. I think it is at least as important to have mutual trade grow qualitatively, and by that I mean at multiple levels. Upstream, midstream, downstream, fully integrated between China and ASEAN, China and Malaysia. Because until now, much of it has involved third parties in other continents which are less reliable, coming in the production and supply chain. So if there is more direct trade at multiple levels between China and ASEAN, China and Malaysia, we would be less reliant on unreliable third parties coming in to disrupt our trade. So let's have much more trade, yes, in terms of volume, but also in variety at different levels to be fully integrated, so that is the logical and rational way to go. And I believe that that is what ASEAN has in mind now, because we need to actually beware of further disruptions like this. We do not know when this is going to end exactly, and even Europe is worried. There is no longer any distinction as far as Donald Trump is concerned between friends and adversaries, allies and rivals. So the whole trade world is actually in chaos, and it could get worse before it gets better. So now we have to be prepared, and ASEAN, led by Malaysia this year as chair, is forming the strategy to work with China on this.
Can you give us some example, like how this economic cooperation, trade cooperation between China, Malaysia, China, ASEAN countries have changed people's lives in this region? What kind of impact it has brought to people's daily lives in this region? Okay.
Let me give you the Belt and Road Initiative as an example. When Belt and Road Initiative was launched about 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, it was basically a brick and mortar initiative. It was highway, ports, railways. But since then, the BRI has evolved. It has evolved into a green BRI, solar panels, EVs and others. And it has also evolved into Health Silk Road, where China played such an important part during the pandemic, assisting countries in the developing world to access the vaccine that we needed. And then now BRIs has also evolved into digital BRI. We are seeing China's technology moving in, helping us to transform our day-to-day living. Huawei, Alibaba has got footprints in Malaysia. Alibaba is testing out the smart city concept with Kuala Lumpur. These are revolutionary. These are impacting the day-to-day living of Malaysian and Southeast Asian in general. So as Boon has said, China's footprint on an ASEAN sort of connection is more than just trade. It is very deep and it's very broad, and it goes down to the day-to-day living of the people. We experience China on a daily basis now. So I think that relationship is very, very deep and very strong. There is a lot of potential, a lot of room to continue to grow and to flourish.
Any of you want to add on this?
Well, if I may comment on BRI in Southeast Asia per se. Well, so far in the first 10 years, we have witnessed how connectivity has been reshaped in the region by the BRI projects, particularly the infrastructure projects in certain countries in ASEAN. For instance, like China-Laos Railway. China-Laos Railway, I still could remember that the Pan-Asian Railway, which was once discussed when I was then the Transport Minister of Malaysia, I had the privilege to chair the meeting. And we were then unsure of the kind of challenges that Laos was going to face, if at all the project were to take off the ground. That was in the year 2008. Little do we expect that at the end of the day, now China-Laos Railway turned out to be the first to be completed. And what we could see now is it managed to transform a landlocked country, that is Laos, right, into a land-linked country. And immediately we could see the enhancement of competitiveness, economic competitiveness of the country was elevated enormously. That is one example. Another one, of course, that reminds me of the high-speed rail in Jakarta, Bandung.
Yes.
In Indonesia, everybody, of course, everybody in Malaysia, of course, we have been talking about that, and some of us, we are envious of the Indonesians. Now, how good it is, if at all, now we can have the same high-speed rail in our country. And that has reshaped the paradigm of their daily life. When we come to the second phase of BRI implementation, well, that is even more exciting because as it goes green, now we are anticipating the new economic drivers like green transformation and digital economy. They are there to reshape our life again. Our socio-economic ecosystem would also be very much influenced. And I wouldn't be surprised that in times to come, even the small yet beautiful programs that BRI is now undertaking in some countries across the global south might also be brought to this part of the world. The assistance, livelihood assistance programs, perhaps would be here to touch on a lot of hearts and minds of the people here. Now, because as we are still developing, perhaps certain segments of our society, they need to have that beyond just sheer infrastructural development. So there are many more things for us to explore here, not just solely infrastructure or sheer economics. Yeah, I'm quite hopeful of that. Yeah,
I think in Asia, this region is really quite amazing because in this region we have the most diverse civilizations and the longest existing civilizations, and we coexist with each other for a really long time. And I think many scholars, politicians already talk about that this new century is Asia's century. So I just want to hear your perspective on this new century with Asia rising and how will we coexist with each other even more harmoniously, and why it's so important to build a shared community with our neighbors. Professor Chung, do you want to add on this?
Absolutely. I think the Asian century will be a very different century from the previous century that we had. For one very big reason, I think, is the diversity that we celebrate, you know. The previous century was this very dimensional vision of the world that it has to be liberal, democratized. Everybody must embrace one ideological framework. But the 21st century, if it is an Asian century, it will be very diverse because we are very different. We embody some of the ancient civilization of the world. And we have continued to learn to live with one another, coexist with one another. Sure, there are some challenges, but overall, we learn to live with one another. And Malaysia embodies that. Malaysia is a multiracial, multi-religious, multi-civilizational society. We do have challenges, but on the whole, we have managed to hold this together. And Malaysia, in some ways, is truly Asia, to use a slogan. And our Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is absolutely committed to this Islamic Confucian civilizational dialogue. And he has, together with, when he visited President Xi Jinping about 3 years ago, they both committed to want to promote President Xi's initiative called the Global Civilization Initiative. During President Xi's visit in Kuala Lumpur today and tomorrow, there is a conference happening at the University of Malaya to commemorate this effort that is ongoing, that's been going on in Malaysia between Islam and the Confucian tradition. So I think this is absolutely a critical moment for us. It's not only an Asian century, but it's also an Asian Renaissance moment when we can celebrate the diversity that represents us, that we will not only be active in the socio-economic dimension, but also at the civilizational dimension. We could celebrate the beauty of our culture, our language, our cuisine, our different way of life, our religious belief. There is room. I think the 21st century, Asian century, will be very different from the 20th century that we have just gone past.
How different? Can you be more specific?
It will be different, as I said. It will be very colorful. It will be not unidimensional. It will be multidimensional. We will have room for people who have different political systems to coexist with one another. We have room for people with different religious civilizational makeup to coexist with one another. We will be very multilingual. We will embody the whole of what it is, represents a human race. You don't have to have one singular ideological, political vision in order to have a community of shared future for humankind. A community of shared future for humankind, there are many ways in which we could realize that. And we could work together without one singular way, that you have to be liberal and democratized. We have many different systems. We can do it our way, and we can achieve that. Human flourishing can happen in many, many different ways. And we should celebrate that. Asians have always celebrated that, and we should really take this moment to celebrate.
As a Chinese person coming to Malaysia for the very first time, in the past few days, I found something very interesting to me. For example, the similarity between Chinese culture and the Muslim culture in Malaysia. Like during Chinese New Year, Chinese people give money to people in a red envelope. And here I just found out like Muslim people here give money in a green envelope, green pocket to the host of the party during Ramadan. So I find that so unique, interesting. You find some similarities between Chinese culture and Malay Muslim culture. So Professor Chang, do you feel there are a lot of similarities between Confucianism and Islam?
Well, there are. Let me just begin by saying that there are differences. Mm-hmm. And the unique thing about, for us in Asia in general, is that we learn to live with the differences. Mm-hmm. There are similarities as well. But I think the more important thing, the greater lessons that we can learn from the Malaysian experience and also the Asian experience in general is not so much that we share a lot of similarities. It would be very boring if we are all the same. Mm-hmm. But it is the differences that we have. Mm-hmm. And we learn to live with the differences. And that is where I think the unique lesson that we can give to the rest of the world, for us from Malaysia and Southeast Asia and Asia as such, is that we do not have to eradicate all the differences, but we learn to live with it, and actually we learn to flourish together and build and nurture each other through our differences. As you rightly pointed out, you were so amazed that you encountered some of my Malay Muslim Malaysians giving you a red packet for Hari Raya Ramadan as a celebration. This is a very good example of how we adapt and adopt our differences. The red packet thing is a very Chinese culture thing, but over the years, our fellow Malaysian, Malay Malaysian, Muslim Malaysian have learned to embrace that as well. This is where we see this learning and from our differences coming together, and we come out with something new from two different, and we syncretize and synthesize, and something more beautiful comes out of it. I just want to also bring in a historical dimension to this Islamic Confucian heritage that we have. Much has been talked about Zheng He coming down to Nanyang and to Malacca during the Ming Dynasty. What is little known about Zheng He is actually he is a Hui Muslim. You know, it's amazing that in the 15th century, Ming Dynasty at its height, at its power, and it's a very powerful admiral. And at the top of the Ming fleet, the leader is a Hui Muslim. This is a wonderful, wonderful testimony of how diverse and rich China is. China is predominantly Confucian, but it has room for diversity. Over its long history, it has always learned to absorb and coexist with many foreign religions that came and became part of it. Buddhism came from India and it's become part of China. You know, and Muslim has, over the centuries, has become part of the Chinese heritage in the Hui Muslim heritage. So the Confucian Asian civilization in general has learned to coexist with one another, and we see that being manifested in Malaysia as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to add on this topic?
Oh, yes. I'm quite tempted to comment on the community of shared future. Mm-hmm. When we talk about cultures, certainly we have a lot more to say. And we know very well that in this part of the world, Malaysia in particular, we have been so used to influencing one another in terms of cultural norms, practices, subconsciously or sometimes even not mindfully. Not that we want to do something deliberately, but rather we leave it to the natural course. I think that in itself explains the kind of tolerance that we have been fostering within our social fabric. And I am proud to say that Southeast Asia, having had that kind of virtues of being inclusive and versatile, that makes Southeast Asia an ideal spot for China to engage with, in particular in pursuit of our partnership. When we talk about our partnership, of course, we have been seeing how China-Malaysia, for instance, our relationship has been evolving from one height to another. In 2013, we were then establishing the CSP, or Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. And 10 years later, in the year 2023, we raised to a new height, that is community with a shared future, rooted in amity, sincerity, symbiosis, and inclusivity. These are the four key elements entailed in the China's neighborhood diplomacy. And I wish to see that when Southeast Asia is to be judged by others in the world perspective, perhaps people don't judge us by sheer economics. I think we have many more to offer. Perhaps our kind of accommodative attitude, our kind of inclusiveness, these are the essential virtues that we hope that others can emulate. And perhaps, who knows, maybe the kind of partnership that I said earlier, that is the community with a shared future between China-Malaysia, between China and even ASEAN, for instance, now ultimately would evolve into a very useful template for the whole world. Of course, I'm not saying that we need to create a stereotype, but suffice to say that end of the day, now this template must be able to fit in the local conditions, the local dynamics, so to speak, and even the local norms. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nagara.
Well, we often say this region of East Asia, meaning Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, is a very diverse region. And it is. Diversity means differences, but maybe not so much differences, but differentness, without being antagonistic or confrontational. But if we look at the bigger picture, we actually have a lot in common as well. And in terms of values, for example, once we talk about Asian values, Whether you spell it with a small letter V or capital letter V, it is still something that we cherish, we share in, for example, harmony, in order, and with respect to tradition, wisdom, and pragmatism. We don't get involved in ideological battles and so on. You see so often in the West, in the Cold War and so on, which are wasteful, unnecessary, and self-defeating. So what we have is, for example, being a region in East Asia of the global South, our main priority is development, economic development. This is something we share. We have the non-aligned movement, and the economic equivalent of the non-aligned movement is the G77. And Malaysia, I have to also mention, is one of the co-founders of G77 plus China, because we have so much to learn from China's development. It is a country that has expedited development in multiple areas in a very short space of time. And there's a lot to learn for anyone who is humble enough to learn. And we are. So I think this is where we see the similarities and what we share, for example, in the BRI. Well, back in 2010, the Hanoi Declaration of ASEAN was about an ASEAN Master Plan for Connectivity. And that is very important because connectivity links places and peoples in a way that multiplies the potential for development. Individual countries can only develop so much, but if we do it together, we can do much more. And 3 years later, President Xi Jinping announced the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, which takes connectivity to an even higher level, connecting not just East Asia among countries in our region, but throughout West Asia, Africa, Central Asia, Eurasia, all the way to Europe. And the resources that are available as well to do that, that makes a big difference. And this is something which we have to remember because we are all pulling in the same direction. We are working together at different levels, and we need that cooperation in order to succeed. Now, in the BRI, we have the Global Security Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, a Global Civilization Initiative, which all fits into the 3 pillars of ASEAN as represented in the political security community of ASEAN, economic community, and the socio-cultural community. So what we have is moving in the right direction with correct values and the priorities, but to working together at multiple levels so that we can achieve the maximum that we want to achieve in the shortest time possible.
What you just shared, I think I get the idea that countries in Asia, we are connected and driven by the same goal and the shared values, like Global Security Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative. All these initiatives are driving us together. Unlike some countries claim that this region is being coerced to be aligned together or whatever. But no, it's not the military coercion or economic coercion. It's rather we have a lot more shared values, and actually we coexist with each other harmoniously for a really long time, hundreds of years, thousands of years, and the history is much longer than some countries' existence. So I think this is the real thing that connects us all, right? And that's why it's so important that the BRI, the connectivity, not just infrastructure, transportation, but the connectivity, connect people, connect ideas, connect civilizations. That's something the Asian countries are trying to achieve in the near future. Do you think so?
Yes, absolutely. I'm still mindful of the 5 pillars of connectivity, underscoring the BRI, and one of which is the people-to-people connectivity. And in the past, of course, people seem to be more obsessed with infrastructure development. And many a time, some political pundits, they even equate BRI with infrastructure development. And that, of course, we know that is untrue. And now with the mushrooming of some tourism-friendly initiative like mutual visa-free visits between China and Malaysia, China-ASEAN countries, Now, I could see that this is going to be a fertile ground for us to promote further the track 2 diplomacy. When we talk about track 2 diplomacy, that is not just confined within the bounds of tourism, but more importantly, I wish to see more scholarly exchange, academic exchange, or even, for this matter, think tank in exchange. And I'm glad to see that this is now on track. And more Chinese think tanks are now coming abroad. And so far, my think tank, the BRI caucus for Asia Pacific BRICAP, we have been receiving various NGOs or various think tanks from China now for academic exchange. And we hope this could be further evolved now into a trend, right? Only by so doing, now we can now touch the hearts of the locals. Well, I would say this looks very promising at this juncture, and do keep it up.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to add on something?
Well, I would just say this, we always talk about globalization as a modern phenomena. I think that Asian has already had some measures of globalization during the Ming Dynasty. As you were saying, Jinping, that Asian has always interacted with one another. We have kept open borders. The Maritime Silk Road is one. The Continental Silk Road is also one. The Marco Polo Silk Road has opened doors and gates and borders with one another. The civilization sort of interaction has always been happening all the time. Globalization had already happened in Asia itself. So I think we are moving towards the next stage right now, 21st century. The social media phenomena, the technology, the digital reality that we are in right now, you yourself experience it on a daily basis, is allowing us to get even more closer to each other. I think we will have, barring any unforeseen incidents, I think the future looks quite promising for us here in Asia if we stay the course. As one would say, that we focus on what it is that we have our shared values on, and then we continue to do what is best for ourselves, and also what we have been doing quite well, really, over the past few decades. And then we should be able to realize much of the China dream that you have had, and also the Southeast Asian dream, through the framework of the community of shared future for humankind.
Thank you.
Well, we are strong in our identity as a region, and we are confident in our ability, having come so far in development, although we have still some ways to go. But I think not only is East Asia an area of diversity and promise, but also it has already demonstrated significant potential ever since the middle of the last century, from the rise of Japan post-war to the ASEAN countries, the newly industrializing economies, now China. We in East Asia is also the most economically dynamic region in the world for more than half a century. And this will continue for the foreseeable future. And I think the rest is up to us to work on it. And I think there is no other region in the world that can match even our potential output. And given that we are firm in our cultural background and what we share together, the global uncertainties we are facing now are actually bringing us together even more, so that we will build on the relationships that we have, economic and otherwise, so that I think this region will be a thriving region for the rest of this century.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Really wonderful discussion. And I learned so much from all of you. And I hope all my viewers, no matter where you are, will also enjoy what this gentleman, what these professors have just shared. I think I really agree with what you all just shared, that Asia know how to deal with similarities, but also, most importantly, we know how to deal with the differences. And we coexist with each other in this region for centuries, for thousands of years. If we can manage that with so many diverse civilizations, I think everybody in the world can do that too. So I'm sure with our joint effort, we can bring a renaissance to Asia, but we can also build a community with a shared future with our neighbors, but also with every country in the world. Give a follow to all these gentlemen, and I will also keep bringing their thoughts on all the platforms on social networks. Thank you all for watching. I hope you like this conversation. Subscribe, stay tuned. Thank you. Until the next time.